The U.S. response to China's controversial actions in the South China Sea is consistency, the Navy's top admiral said. Speaking in an exclusive interview with VOA, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral John Richardson said the United States Navy has been at about the same force levels in the South China Sea for about 70 years. Nothing has elevated too much or decreased too much. We've been pretty steady, he said. China and the U.S. strongly disagree on territorial claims in the sea's international waterways. China considers much of the sea its territory, overlapping with the territorial claims of other nations, and has created hundreds of hectares of artificial islands to bolster its territorial claims. The U.S. frequently conducts freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea to dispute China's claims and to promote free passage through international waters that carry half the world's merchant fleet tonnage, worth trillions of dollars each year. Richardson said the U.S. Navy has advocated rules and norms that have fueled the emergence of the Asian economies. We're going to consistently be there, Richardson said, and we'll be ready to advocate for those up and down the spectrum of competition, as needed.
We welcome to VOA Asia Bonnie Glaser. Bonnie is a senior advisor for Asia and the director of the China Power Project at CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington. Bonnie, thanks for being with us. We know that China is claiming the entire South China Sea, plus more than that. What does the U.S. want them to do? Has the United States expressed anything definitive?
Well, over the years, not only in the Trump administration, but also in the Obama administration, the United States has called for China to not increase tensions, to exercise self-restraint, to negotiate a code of conduct with the other claimants and frankly all of Southeast Asia, that are these 10 countries that are members of ASEAN, so that they can peacefully manage their disputes. And the United States has essentially asked China, as it has asked all countries, to abide by international law. And there was an arbitral tribunal finding in July of 2016 that the 9-dash line does not have any legal standing, and therefore claims that any country makes to any land features in the South China Sea and water has to be in accordance with the Convention on the Law of the Sea. So if you claim water, it has to extend from land China continues to say that it has some ill-defined claim of historic rights and jurisdiction over a large swath of the waters in the South China Sea. And so I do think that the United States has been clear about what all countries should do, and it is not singling out China. There should be no militarization, no construction of fake islands, and everybody should abide by law and look for peaceful ways to manage disputes.
But China is paying no attention to those pleas.
Well, that's pretty much correct. China has, I think, a blueprint for what it wants to do in the South China Sea. It continues to militarize its islands. It continues to intimidate and bully its neighbors. It has recently threatened both the Philippines and Vietnam with military force if they go ahead and exploit energy reserves, energy deposits that are inside their legal maritime boundaries, what's known as the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. That's very much illegal. So when the U.S. says the rights of small countries and large countries alike should be respected, it has those kinds of actions in mind. So the Chinese indeed are really not exercising self-restraint at all. They are acting in accordance with their own interests, and they are damaging the interests of other countries.
How big of a flashpoint is this?
Well, I really don't think that the U.S. and China are going to have a military conflict in the South China Sea, even if there were an accident, say, between two ships or two aircraft. And some of your listeners may remember that in 2001, there actually was a collision between a U.S. surveillance aircraft and a Chinese jet. The Chinese pilot died. The Americans that were on board the surveillance aircraft did land in an emergency landing in Hainan Island, and they all survived. But that could happen again. So, yes, there's a risk of accident. There certainly is a high risk of growing tensions. But I don't think that there is a very great likelihood that we're going to see a war that is triggered in the South China Sea.
You see a way out of this?
I think that there will be competition that will go on for some time. I don't think that China is going to make concessions, and I think that the United States will continue to exercise freedom of navigation. But the United States can't roll back what China has achieved. It's turning of these islands into military outposts. So I think in peacetime, China will continue to use these outposts to coerce their neighbors. I think the U.S. doesn't have a good toolbox to prevent that. And as long as we don't go to war, then there will never be any real use of the military capabilities to fight each other. I don't see any near-term solution unless China decides that its relations with the rest of the region are more important than what it's trying to do in the South China Sea. Right now, China thinks it can have its cake and eat it, too. It can have both good relations with the region, and it can build up these military outposts. And as long as it sees it can do both, it will do both. So the real question is how to shape a strategy that forces China to choose, and that can only be done if the claimants and the other members in ASEAN will stand up against China, push back and say, our interests matter too. But for obvious reasons, they're all afraid to do so. And they don't think that the United States has their back, and they're probably right.
Bonnie Glaser is a senior advisor for Asia and the director of the China Power Project at CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington. Thanks so much, Bonnie.